All right, guys, we're back here on the I Love CVille Show, and thank you kindly for the patience here. A little snafu with ISP on the program, but we're back live across all social media channels, and I do see the questions that have come in, and I will archive them here. Our guest, if you saw the first 8 or 9 minutes before the ISP snafu, is Elliott Harding. He is an Esquire, he is a father, he's a stakeholder, he's an all-around A-plus guy, a sports fan, and a guy who has the pulse of the community because, frankly, the shoe leather is on the streets, the shoe leather is in the courtroom, the shoe leather is in the breweries and the restaurants. He's around. His face is around this community. All right, so Elliott, we started by introducing you to the community. I've done that. A father, an attorney, a UVA grad, I believe WNL?
For law school, yeah.
WNL grad. So this dude's a smart dude right here, UVA undergrad, WNL law school. We were talking about how it's not necessarily a zero-sum game when it comes to education and taxes.
Right.
We can be so pro closing the education gap, and I know we both are, and we can be pro narrowing that gap and championing public school education, but we can also at the same time be pro not gentrifying the community with raising the taxes on rooftops. That is regressive, at least in my opinion. Anywhere you want to go on this topic.
Yeah, so first of all, you got to take into consideration it's the worst timing to go through a property tax increase. The assessments have all come through and they're drastically higher, so that's a built-in increase nominally. Now you're going to increase it in the rate, and then you have the highest inflation rate in a very long time. Inflation, it has a disproportionate impact on those who are at the lower socioeconomic classes because of the marginal value of basic needs and funds. And so you put all of that together and you're going to crush people. Now, we're also in a college town. Student loans have been pushed off for 2 years. They're about to be reenacted again this summer. So when you add that on top of all of this, you're not only pricing out older folks who have been here a long time and might be living on a fixed income, fixed budget, maybe on a pension or a retirement or Social Security. You're going to be pricing out a lot of folks, young families, that are going to be stretched thin. And for what in order to close the achievement gap, we're going to do something that we should have done, and that is fix our schools. We should fix the schools. But school's changing, right? School's been different for the past 2 years. We don't necessarily know if it's permanently going to go back to what it was, should it go back to what it was. And we're going to dump most of it into physical infrastructure that might prove to be outdated long term as a model. So I don't know.
I agree with everything he just said right there.
That's what I think. Now, I think there are other ways to generate revenue or do cost savings to fill the gap. I don't think it's the right time for property tax increasing.
Help us understand how this works, because no one follows delegates in the General Assembly and what's happening in Richmond perhaps more closely than you, okay? So help me understand this. There was a potential 1% sales tax increase that the General Assembly was deliberating. And had this have gained momentum or approval, it could have potentially come to localities, the local jurisdictions, as a referendum. Mm-hmm. And for those that don't follow that as closely as us, a referendum is essentially the population votes on whether or not it wants to do this. Mm-hmm. Give me the dynamics here, what you saw. The expectation last fall when Charlottesville City Council approved school reconfiguration mm-hmm. was that it was going to be a Democrat-controlled mm-hmm. Richmond. That was not the case. Mm-hmm. Now we see the Republican influence is considerably more. And that referendum never even had a chance to get to Charlottesville. What am I missing here?
Well, if the argument is that the lack of the referendum is what's creating this hole in the budget, if that's the one-to-one...
Mayor Snook has made that argument.
Well, no, okay. Then we're just transferring a sales tax onto a property tax, which has a significantly different degree of considerations.
Explain how.
Well, property taxes are your fundamental basis of home and lodging. We already have an affordable housing crisis, and that's a proper term given our limitations in this area. And so when you increase property taxes, you're inherently going to increase the cost of living and therefore the affordability of all homes. And that's not just for homeowners, it's actually more so for the renter. I mean, these are folks that are already struggling to be able to afford to live in this community and pay their rent. Forget saving for a down payment, right? And then you throw taxes on top of it. That's different than a sales tax, because sales in this...
You can choose.
Oh, yeah, unless it's your most basic needs, right? A sales tax is more of a choice, and we have so much discretionary spending in this area that you're taxing a different your tax has a different material impact on those that it is being spread amongst, and it's much more voluntary.
So he's basically describing the dynamics of regressive tax tactics and...
More egalitarian.
Okay, explain that.
Meaning, one is regressive. The property tax, I believe, is regressive, and well, both taxes are regressive. Sales taxes are regressive because, on some goods, because you need to spend money to live, like your food and your basics. But we have a lot of discretionary spending in this area. Our economy is very discretionary spending based, service based, hospitality, tourism, things of that nature. And we have average high income in the greater Albemarle area that pours in. And so a lot of our revenue through sales tax is much more discretionary and therefore more equal. That's my view on it, at least.
Well, no, and I think you back it with reasoning here. Would you then, instead of utilize the tax lever, and I hate to even say this,
I wish the referendum had been passed, actually.
You wish it had gotten to the local level?
Yeah, because I think locality...
I think it probably would have passed.
Locally, it might have passed, but I think localities should have more choice in how they generate their revenue. I think it's ridiculous that the ability of a locality to raise a sales tax has to come from Richmond. I think that's odd.
And now we're referencing Dillon Rule versus, what is it, Home Rule?
Yeah.
Dillon Rule versus Home Rule. We're in a Dillon Rule when the reality is, and we've talked about this before with Jim Hingley. Jim often watches and listens to the program. He's been on the program before. Vanessa Parkhill, Queen of Earlysville, hello, welcome to the show. Florence Worley Vaya is giving you props right now on what you just said. Dillon Rule versus Home Rule. Mm-hmm. Charlottesville, in a lot of ways, does not have the autonomy to make decisions like this because it's a Dillon Rule state. Mm-hmm. So it really puts an emphasis or prioritizes who you elect from a delegate standpoint. Mm-hmm. Walk us through that.
I mean, that's the truth. Richmond, the state, has to authorize a significant amount of things for a locality to be able to exercise its own local authority on a range of issues, including tax generation. As far as who you choose to send to Richmond, really you should, if you disagree with the current model, there are members of both parties that have issues with the current structure of the Dillon versus Home Rule dynamic in Virginia and that are looking to change it. And then there are members of both parties that love it and as it stands. And there are arguments for both sides, but ultimately I believe it should be reformed such that the locality has a lot more liberty to loosen its restrictions on people, loosen its zoning requirement, loosen some of the things that Richmond requires. And I also think that they should have more autonomy in determining how they generate their tax base so that we can have more competitive markets. Fluvanna and Charlottesville City have very different reasons to tax people in different ways. One's more of a county with a lot more commuter base. The other one isn't. And so I think there should be more flexibility in how they can generate revenue.
I want to be in your straight shooter here. Do we ever have a shot of becoming a home rule state? And what would need to transpire? Because it seems to me Richmond would be very hesitant to give up the power they currently have. Even if somebody runs on a platform of home rule or still-in rule, once they get a taste of delegate life in Richmond, I would imagine that mindset starts to change.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I wish it wasn't so bipolar insofar as it's either one or the other. I think there's a way to do a hybrid. I think that there's ways to loosen up some of the areas of the home rule versus do-in rule dynamics such that localities can have a lot more blanket authority so that on some topics they could do things without Richmond having to get involved, and then maybe in very, very few or select areas Richmond keeps playing a role. That's the only real long-term hope, is to kind of piecemeal reform it rather than have some overhaul. I just don't think Virginia would do that.
What'd you make of the Youngkin 2-point win in November?
I think
Surprised?
I wasn't surprised on election day. I think his momentum was obvious, and I think McAuliffe's campaign was awful.
Yeah.
I think Youngkin, in hindsight, kind of like in 2016, whether you liked it or not, Youngkin was probably the only Republican nominee that could have beaten Terry, and Terry was the only one that was going to lose to a Republican because he had so much history and record
Baggage.
He's just not, he wasn't well beloved by the entire base. He had a record. But ultimately it came down to the last few weeks of momentum about schools generally. I know everyone wanted to touch on, was it about CRT? Was it about safety in schools in Loudoun County? Was it about
Masking?
It was all of those things.
Say hi to John Blair. He's watching you right now.
Hey, John.
Yeah, we love you, John Blair.
Yep. Miss you in the city.
Same. I say that all the time. I didn't mean to interrupt you, though, but I know you would appreciate John Blair watching.
I always appreciate John. So,
Me too.
Yeah, that ultimately, though, is about the schools generally, because not only are schools subject of being a massive issue to discuss at all times, and they should be because they need to be fixed, but COVID and 2 years worth of, or let's call it a year and a half at that point maybe, of parents kind of, whether they liked it or not, having to reclaim a lot more of that educator role as far as your home becomes the school setting, and your time is stretched, your money is stretched, your patience is stretched. They didn't like the trajectory of what was going on with the schools, and I think when Terry McAuliffe said parents have no role in a child's what's being taught in schools, I think parents took that personally, and they went and they voted accordingly.
I think you just said it better than I could have said. This is a topic where you can springboard in a lot of ways. Is the Commonwealth, let's take Commonwealth, is the Commonwealth ideology, which for generations has been very Democrat, is that ideology, or has that ideology gotten much more centered? We call it purple. Everyone calls it purple. Or could it even be leaning red?
As far as the ideology of the Commonwealth? I mean, you're right. It's been blue for a decade.
At least.
Yeah, it was red there for a decade. You look at McDonnell and George Allen and Jim Gilmore, and then, it went back and forth. But it has been blue for a while now. I still think it's, I don't know. I think it's hard to say. I think the Republican Party is not sure where it is right now as far as where it wants to go. Forever, Trump kind of dominated the narrative for 4 years. That's all anybody wanted to say, and granted, they still want to talk about it. But when it comes down to policies that are impacting you day to day, I think people like to hold those in power accountable, and Virginia very often goes opposite of the party in power in DC, right? And with Biden in and with the current state of things, I think there was a large protest vote as well. And they're thinking Youngkin seems more moderate in his approach to things and more reasonable. You're not going to get, at least that's how it was perceived in October and November. And I think ultimately you're finding that the independents are willing to consider Republicans in a time of inflation or in time of school disruption or in times of crisis.
I think it's important to emphasize this. This is one of the reasons I wanted to get Elliott on the show. Dude is a political junkie, a political strategist, and follows politics in the Commonwealth as closely as anyone I know, okay? You got gas that is going through the roof. We just saw the CPI number, the Consumer Price Index, 7.9%. Mm-hmm. And that 7.9% does not even factor in today's gasoline. Mm-hmm. This is in the rears. This is a number in the rears. So the next CPI that comes out is going to be even higher, okay? Midterms are 8 months away. Yeah. Less than 8 months. Mm-hmm. Less than 8 months away. What is your Sabato crystal ball say that inflation, and I hate to even use this word, a cusp of a recession due at midterms? You don't agree with that, with the R word?
Well, it's hard. It has the feeling of such. I mean, it's an interesting situation. There are a lot of factors coming in at the same point, but we've spent so much money in the last 24 months. Inflation was inevitable, and we can't spend our way out of fixing this problem. That is the problem. We produced a significant amount of dollars in the last 24 months and flooded the system with it due to the pandemic. And then you can't, when you turn the economy back on, it just doesn't disappear that way. Spending, you weren't going to spend your way out of a pandemic. It was more health concerns. So it's not like you can artificially subsidize a market as a way to fix a health concern like a pandemic. The traditional reasons we do so much spending weren't tied to the problem. And so you've got inflation, you've got gas prices, you've got war, the U.S. is in physically, but it's impacting global supply issues. You already had supply chain issues.
And labor.
And labor issues. I think you're going to see a massive backlash at the polls. I think the Republicans will take the House. I think there will be a strong narrative from them going into 2024 into the White House. I don't know who the nominee would be, but right now I don't think that the federal Democratic Party is in a strong position to speak on massive achievements since they've been in. I think they're kind of having to put out a lot of fires at once.
Well, I mean, we got a short list we can spitball for nominees
for 2024.
Yeah, I mean, Youngkin's on that short list.
Yeah, he's named. I mean, he flipped a blue state in Mid-Atlantic.
Okay.
If he was on a
DeSantis is on that short list
for sure.
Don't you think?
Yeah, I think DeSantis is the front runner.
Okay.
Assuming Donald Trump doesn't run for president. In which case it's a completely different conversation.
I would think I'm spitballing, this makes for great conversation for talk shows here.
Sure.
Great conversations at the brewery or wherever we are.
Right.
I would think one of the worst things that could be for the Republican Party would having Trump on the ticket.
I don't think Trump needs to be on the ticket.
He does not need to be on the ticket.
The Republicans have a better chance of winning if he is not on the ticket.
1,000% agree with you.
I think, yeah.
And I think how Youngkin won.
I think DeSantis-Youngkin would win.
I think DeSantis-Youngkin would make a force, an incredible tandem.
I don't think they could lose.
An incredible tandem. And how Youngkin won in the Commonwealth was by distancing himself from Trump while still appealing to voters.
He won more voters in counties that went for Trump than Trump.
Okay. And he did that by becoming more, on paper, a centrist.
He did it because he was tapping into Virginians.
Yeah, he was a centrist. He was a common sense guy.
When he went down to Southwest, he was talking to people in Southwest, not some caricature of someone who lives in Southwest.
I agree. I agree with that.
And there's a difference, huge difference between the two.
And I think you're 100% right. Vanessa Parkhill, we'll get to your comments. Jason Howard, we'll get to your comments. Gwendolyn Gale Cassidy, watching in Holland, we'll get to your comments here on the program. I wonder, and I'm wondering aloud with you, I wonder if that shift in ideology, where it's becoming more centrist common sense, will even trickle into Charlottesville or Albemarle County. Have you considered or brainstormed that? And Vanessa Parkhill's got a comment about that.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, sure. I think it would and has in some respects.
At the polls, no.
Well, depends on what you're talking about. Are we meaning Charlottesville City's going to go? I mean, I think it goes like 87% Democrat, 85. You know, it's usually over 75 for sure in various races. But when you get to a city council race where it's between personalities, and even though a lot of people carry the same partisan name on city council, right? They all have a D next to their name now. They have very different viewpoints. And
comparing Lloyd to Michael Payne is a good example.
correct.
Mayor Snook
I
to
think
Councilor Payne.
they've openly said they have different viewpoints on things, you know, yet they carry the same banner. And at a certain point, you know, it becomes what I call demographic capture, or in this case, partisan capture, where when you try to run as an outside party of that system in like the city, if you were to run as a Republican for city council, even if you connect with people on the issues a little better personally, one-on-one throughout the city, it takes a significant amount of run-up time and resources to touch enough people to convince them to vote outside of the Democratic Party, because it's had such a strong stranglehold.
It's a monopoly.
Right. And at that point, you should just maybe consider an independent run, as we did see former Mayor Walker did, where she did connect outside of the party process.
As we saw Bellamy Brown try to do.
He tried to do as well. It can be done. And, you know, Ms. Walker deserved a lot of credit for being able to do that. And I think that other people should try to do that, regardless of which way they want to go. I ran as an independent for a higher office, and I found it was easier to connect with people on the issues that matter here that we can impact, rather than having to discuss, do you like Trump or Biden?
Right. And when you ran, the shadows of Trump were very real.
Oh, sure.
Now, if you ran, would you have done it as an R? In today's climate.
That's a difficult way to go about it. I mean, now, first of all, there are different maps, different time. I can't really say, but the reason there were a lot of reasons that, I don't know, I think when I ran pursuant to the message and the brand I wanted to portray.
So you would run as an I again?
I would have run that race as an I again, but each race is different.
Each race is totally different.
So it's hard to, you know.
It's totally different. We'll get to viewers and listeners here, and you're resonating here. Wild Bill McKenzie, hello. Vanessa says she's the queen of Earlysville. Commonwealth has not been blue for generations. So she's correcting me here. Maybe in Northern Virginia or in Hampton Roads, Albemarle County was solidly red well into the early 2000s at least.
McDonnell carried Albemarle.
Yeah, she says guys, Albemarle Board of Supervisors, not too sure, but definitely in state elections, BOS, Board of Supervisors, was much more centrist than today. She's talking about the early 2000s. We need more focus on building business, including diversifying types of industry in Albemarle. That's the Queen of Earlysville. I believe, and you may be able to help me with this, this is probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you, and it's not even a deep one. The last Republican on the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, was it Ken Boyd?
Yeah.
It was Ken Boyd, right? Rio District?
Rivanna.
Ken Boyd? The finance guy. Now was Slutsky an independent?
I mean, if he was, I don't know. I think he was a Democrat.
Okay. All right, so Ken Boyd, the last one. We'll get to these comments coming in here from Jason Howard as well. All right, let's talk local level here. So we both love Charlottesville. Our business is I Love CVille. I may live in eastern Albemarle County, but I make my living in the city of Charlottesville in the downtown mall.
I think Charlottesville is there's city proper, and then there's the area at large.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
100% agree with you.
It's not an event.
Exactly. No, right.
Yeah.
It's not an event. I 100% agree with you. What is your state of the union on Charlottesville at large?
It's still, I mean, I love it. I think it's got all the same, it's got great bones, and it's got a bright future. I think it can't get out of its own way sometimes.
What does that mean?
I think everybody wants to assume that our local governance and certain departments are going to deliver this utopian outcome of egalitarian education, everything's going to be great for everybody. But in reality, year over year, it gets better for those who might have more resources and not exactly ever truly taken care of for those who are marginalized or don't have what they need. And I think it's a lot of people thinking that they can use the government as a tool to fix the proverbial problems when they themselves haven't necessarily experienced those problems, they don't suffer from those problems, and they don't have the solutions for them. So you see the county, you see the city, things like affordable housing. Maybe if they just got out of the way with like over-restrictive zoning or over-restrictive taxation or over-restrictive market control, it would have fixed itself a long time ago. Schools, if we're going to dump $75 million into a capital improvement, is that the best method of actually fixing the achievement gap? Or is it through more staff, better paid staff, lower the student ratio, make alternative curriculums, allow for more flexibility in the system to fit the needs of the individual students, rather than a new building?
This is common sense. Keep going.
So
You're on point right now.
I think we have everything we need to be the best place in the Commonwealth. I think there's no other place in the Commonwealth I would want to live. That's why I've continued to stay here. But we're certainly no utopia. We have a lot to fix.
Carol Thorpe, the queen of Jack Jewett, watching the program. Fellas, Ken Boyd, Rodney Thomas, and Dwayne Snow were all Republicans on the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors at the same time as late as 2011. So thank you, Carol Thorpe. You keep us on our toes. I appreciate that comment. She in fact, is going to come on the show later this month, Carol Thorpe. At one time, very influential stakeholder within the local Tea Party, Carol Thorpe. Jason Howard has this comment. There was an article in the Daily Progress this morning where Governor Youngkin talked about using the surplus budget to cut taxes, doubling the standard deduction for state income taxes, and completely eliminating both the state and local portion of the grocery tax, among other changes. Does the General Assembly go along with these changes? Please ask Elliott.
The House will. The real question is, will the Senate, and the Senate's democratically held, the Republicans in the House will do that for sure, if they haven't already. I mean, they're getting close to the end of session, so I can't speak to how those cuts have been advanced through the GA at this stage. I haven't monitored that. But if it came down to a party line vote on the floor, the House will certainly adopt those. I think the Senate would adopt them too. I think you'd see folks like Chap Peterson flip and vote in favor. I think it would pass that. So yeah, I think those would, right now with inflation, what it is, I think it would, because you think about grocery tax is a regressive tax. When you're spending money on food, people need to eat.
People need to eat.
Now, I'm sure people have frivolous grocery bills, but at the end of the day, people need to eat. So that's the first place you shouldn't be taxing people. The doubling the standard deduction, I think that'll be appreciated and useful. I think these are all things that in this time will be popular enough to be implemented.
Jonathan, what is his take? What is your guest take on incremental sources of tax revenue? We talk about incremental all the time on this program. We understand that jurisdictions, as do you, as does Judah, jurisdictions need money to run. Mm-hmm. We're not opposed to financing or funding jurisdictional management or jurisdictional survival. Mm-hmm. But we are opposed to financing jurisdictional survival on the backs of those on the financial margin that are being gentrified out of the community. And this seems like common sense to the three of us, and frankly, it's the right thing to do. It's called the golden rule. Mm-hmm. It's called being empathetic and thinking of others. So I'm constantly trying to find, you're an entrepreneur, mm-hmm. new ways to drive revenue entrepreneurially from a jurisdiction standpoint. Any ideas from you? And then Gwendolyn, your comment coming up next.
You're talking about alternative sources of revenue here in Charlottesville?
Any or Commonwealth-wide or regionally?
Well, I mean, there are so many that it's hard to start, but the first one, okay, Commonwealth-wide, here's an example. You're talking about SCUMA. Is one of your sponsors.
Yep.
They're engaged in all legal cannabis, I know that. But the markets are changing soon enough, and when recreational use is eventually implemented from a market-based standpoint, localities will very likely have a role in approving dispensaries or retail locations, right? And I say that that's not immediate, but I'm using that as an example. You're about to see in the next 12 to 18 months an alternative source of revenue entering Charlottesville City, if the council were to approve it. Now, when you look at Charlottesville compared to its surrounding counties, Charlottesville will be the most likely and probably the first, but for Nelson, shout out to Board of Supervisor friend Rutherford. I'm sure Nelson will agree to this too.
He watches the program all the time. I'll tag him right now.
But of the localities that surround Charlottesville, Albemarle, Charlottesville will likely approve that market faster than Fluvanna, Greene, Augusta, Orange, Louisa, as far as allowing those things. I'm using a very small example. Things like, as far as alternative methods of revenue, I mean, you want to increase your market, so any ways that you can cut through some red tape to allow businesses to grow, that's one base. But I don't know, I mean, I'd have to really roll up my sleeves and look inside the budget as to where we are and aren't generating fees or things like that as well. But from a pure tax standpoint, we are kind of restricted in some degree by Richmond. And I will give people like Councilor Snook credit there. Like at a certain point, when Richmond binds our hands, we only have only a few different ways pursuant to the Dillon Rule stuff we were discussing that we can generate certain taxes. So.
I've been a huge fan, and I think JR is watching right now. We love you, JR. I've been a huge fan of driving new business to the mall. Mm-hmm. And one of the concepts that we've tried to champion is the beer garden. Mm-hmm. Yesterday evening, a number of locals sent me screen grabs of former police chief Rashal Brackney's tweets. For those that want background on this story, go to ilovecville.com right now. I have a feeling this will be the talk of the town and certainly the talk of the downtown business community. Former police chief Rachel Brackney prevented the downtown mall from having a beer garden during the pandemic, and she directly acknowledges this prevention. She says in 2 tweets to Dave McNair, former Hook writer, now the editor of the DTM, she says, "I refuse to approve the beer garden plan when former interim city manager Chip Boyles and former Charlottesville Office of Economic Development team member Jason Ness wanted to shove it down our throats." Those are her words. She continues, and I'm reading verbatim, "This plan could only be approved if the chief of police signs off on it. I guess the acting chief, which is Tito Durrett, caved to the political pressures of the privileged." And then she closed by saying, "The privileged class are the first to call the police when, air quotes, others have an open container and imbibe on the mall. This plan calls for ambassadors to monitor who paid for the privilege to drink and stroll in the mall. This is pay to play and stroll," end quote. What'd you make of that? She has not been a part of the Charlottesville Police Department since November of last year.
I mean, I think it's hard to say. I think, I don't know why she's saying that. I don't know why it's relevant. I mean, she's moved on, whether it was, for a lot of different reasons. And I think she's still in active litigation with the city.
She has an active lawsuit against the city.
So I don't know why she's saying anything like that. She's just giving other reasons by which someone could justify her having been, terminated.
Yeah.
That's enough of a reason right there. If that was ever said in a meeting of that nature, in that way, that's a totally legitimate thing to say. Is that how you want your chief of police viewing policy? I don't want chief of police viewing policy in that way. I also don't think it's true. Knowing the city, I know plenty of people of all walks of life that like to have a good time. And I've seen the mall or the greater surrounding area used by people of all walks of life. Now, as far as who's currently calling in reports of open containers, well, it's currently against the law. So yeah, if I'm a restaurant, I don't want someone outside of my patio area consuming alcohol and maybe getting highly intoxicated and causing problems with patrons by being drunk and belligerent, because it's currently outside of the structure, right? But if we implemented a beer garden system that you've advocated for, it's a completely different environment. Right. And so to say it's the privileged versus the others, I didn't know it was a privilege to be able to ask for protection by the police, like as far as picking up the phone and calling it. Anybody should be able to call the police. I also don't think it's a good policy for the police to look at those who are asking for help based on their subjective status as whether or not we're going to execute the law. And I don't know why she's saying this. I actually, candidly, I'm more interested in, can we look at the budget of the police department finally?
All right, well, we can go down that road. So the budget of the police department, anywhere you want to go on that?
I'd like to know what it is. I'd like to see how they're spending the money. I think that should be the primary requirement from the city when it comes to the law moving forward, when it chooses the next chief of police, when you're going with the city manager, when you're going this way, given all the talks about criminal justice reform and police oversight over the several years, the first place they need to go is look into the budget and see where we're spending our money. I think that's a very basic requirement.
Viewers and listeners watching the program, this is from Grayson, watches the show routinely. Grayson, it's about time you get a moniker on the program. You routinely make the show better. He says, please ask Mr. Harding how this could be a reason for someone to get terminated if still on the job, and how it could be utilized potentially in a lawsuit against her, an active lawsuit, as he put it.
Well, it's not against her. She's got a suit against the city, as I recall.
That's true.
And I think she was alleging wrongful termination.
She was, based on being a female and a woman of color.
Right. And my perspective is there are a lot of other reasons outside of those. I mean, hopefully those things weren't, I don't know what's going to be proven in court, so I can't speak to what she can and cannot prove. But I do know if while in that position of chief of police, she's airing that those are her reasons and her viewpoints as to how she views the citizenry asking for legal protection. I don't care what race or gender you are. If you're saying, oh, I'm going to veto something that others in the city like because I don't like the people that are going to enjoy it, and I don't like the people that are asking for the help from the police, I think that gives legitimate cause to reconsider their role as the chief of police. I mean, that's just one reason. My point is that that's the type of conversations that were being had behind closed doors before.
You're wondering what else?
Right.
That's what you're saying, right?
Right. I wouldn't be speaking about city policy as an active litigant. That's my advice. But
yeah, I would imagine that's the advice of her attorney from the former late great Johnny Cochran's law firm.
You never know.
You're saying you never know because all attorneys are not.
Well, you also got to recognize that law firm is very well known for being able to play into the media as far as using it as a way to foster a perception in a lawsuit.
I hadn't even thought about that. So perhaps this is
I don't know.
No, but I mean, it's talk show fodder. I mean, she's got an active $3 million lawsuit alleging wrongful termination. Your talk show fodder, strictly talk show fodder, as this is a way to keep maybe the brand and the lawsuit in the news cycle.
Well, Dr. Richardson's got dismissed with prejudice.
We talked about that yesterday.
Right. So I'm just saying from a timing perspective, you have two different lawsuits, two different issues, very similar overlap in time period, and some related claims as far as accusations. I don't know. I don't know why she's doing it. Honestly, it's the type of thing that I try to block out because we rotate through so many different executives in this city. It's hard to get stuck on the past.
What do you make of, for the sake of conversation here, what do you make of Richardson's lawsuit getting dropped?
I didn't read it. I didn't know the claims. I always kind of, based on what I'd heard about the claims, I was speculative as to how
legit it was.
How one was going to be able to find the defense liable. I didn't see how that was going to.
Because he signed an NDA. He signed an agreement saying he would not disclose information about what happened while he was on the job as city manager. Yeah. And then he took a $200,000 plus check and deposited it based on those things.
If that's the case, then yeah, I don't know how he could have proceeded with litigation. So,
a lot of comments coming in here. So this is from Gwendolyn watching in Holland. Just an FYI, gentlemen, Virginia K through 12 schools rank 24th in spending and 29th in funding. The state receives very little educational financing from the federal government. Kindergarten through 12th grade schools represent $12,243 per pupil for a total of almost $16 billion annually. Virginia K through 12 schools receive $1.1 billion or $853 per pupil from the federal government. This is good stuff right here. State funding totals $6.8 billion or $5,270 per pupil. Local funding totals $9.15 billion or $7,094 per pupil. State and local funding is equivalent to 3.1% of Virginia taxpayer income. Federal education funding is equivalent to 0.21% of the state's taxpayer income. And lastly, for Elliott, funding for K through 12 education in Virginia totals $17 billion or $13,217 per pupil. Mm-hmm. That is an economist graduate from UVA who's got a master's from Harvard, watching the program in Holland. Anywhere you want to go on those topics on funding of public schools?
there are certain things that are obviously glaring that need to be fixed, and money's the only way to do that, such as updating. Our schools are outdated. Virginia's schools have not had, we have a lot of old schools throughout the Commonwealth that could and do need to be improved. That being said, we need to always look at where we're spending the money, and not all money is inherently improving the outcome. If financing was the only way, if spending money guaranteed success or positive outcome, or even was always the primary factor, which in many cases it's not the primary factor. And I think to always just look at spending as solving the problem, sometimes spending exacerbates the problem because maybe we're investing in an outdated model. You know, look at what we just had to do with COVID and how many families and children were lacking equal access to things like laptops, resources, caregivers, safe environments, food, attention, what have you. Those are things that are outside of the four walls of a school, yet those things still impact outcome even today when they go back into school. Your home environment, your access to infrastructure to learn. I think spending needs to be reconsidered in how we're doing it, not just, should we throw more money at it? I think we have a history of just throwing more money at it, though.
This question's coming in from Lauren. Ask him about the revenue share agreement.
I think the revenue share agreement is outdated. I think it's unenforceable. I think it's been illegitimate since there's been a moratorium on annexation for the last going on 40 years almost. The city is being effectively paid by the county to not forego exercising annexation, yet it cannot annex by state law, and it's indefinite. And so with that, I don't think it serves a purpose. Now, it's obviously great for the city on its bottom line, but I think it's a little short-sighted to think it's going to always be there. I think that it will run its course, whether due to amendment by the General Assembly or the they'll reevaluate annexation generally. I don't know if it'll be there forever in its current terms, and I think the city would be prudent to try to come to the table in good faith with the county and see if we can get a more equitable arrangement.
This comment this is the Instagram handle, Lily Bree on Instagram. Okay, this is about Brackney. Lily Bree says, the privileged are the first to call the police when others have an open container. And how do I say the word? Is it imbibe?
Yeah.
Is that
imbibe?
Right? Imbibe? Imbibe? It's
yeah.
imbibe? Okay. Lily Bree says, the privileged are the first to call the police when others have an open container and imbibe. This is pay to play and stroll. Lily Bree says, Brackney is not wrong, but I would still like to see a beer garden at the downtown mall. How can it be done in an equitable fashion? I mean, I have some ideas on that.
Well, let me ask you this. First of all, when the others imbibe an open container, well, who can imbibe an open container?
I mean, technically nobody.
Okay, so are the privileged the ones who follow the law? Are those who don't follow the law, are they others? I don't understand from a policing standpoint.
You're saying the law is the law and no one can do it. That's what you're saying.
I don't care if you're the wealthiest guy in town. You can't sit there and
Pound
pop open
beers.
your champagne in the middle of the mall.
Right.
Are you privileged? Probably. Are you also I don't understand her point. I don't. Now, to the commenter's point about how do we make it an equitable environment, you just got to make it an open admittance. I mean, in the sense that
anyone can come.
Yeah. Now you might have a marginal entry fee.
Like, $5 for a wristband.
But I'm sorry, drinking in public generally isn't something that is just like a right to do in the middle of a commercial area. as much as my libertarian streak would say, let the man do it, you have the right to set up a pay-to-enter situation, no different than any other scenario. I think have a small access fee that's equitable, and then if people want to spend more money per drink, let them do that. Don't set a high entry fee.
Yeah, and even take the all right. So this is gaining traction here. I can see, and take some of the revenue, if not all the revenue, from the wristband and allocate it to elements that create that champion social justice. Or narrow the educational gap that widened during COVID.
Sure. Or if the idea...
That's incremental.
I think if Brackney's point was about the potential displacement of, the unhomed on the mall or something, if that was her gist of the others who currently may be cited for open container and then the privileged who are the businesses, if that was her point, yeah, take some of the revenue and put it towards housing. Put it towards, the haven. Put it towards something that can assist with the folks she thinks are somehow on the outside of this. Take the revenue and put it towards helping people, generally.
Stevens, Washington, Crozet, get Elliott's take. He called you Mr. Harding. You're getting a lot of Mr. Hardings here. Get Mr. Harding's take on zoning and what needs to change.
So from the city standpoint, and we may disagree on this, I don't know. I'm a believer in upzoning. I actually am a believer of that, but I don't believe you should be taxed on it until you go to exercise the upzone, meaning if I'm in an R1 and you want to make it R3, until I go to petition to convert my single family dwelling into a higher density dwelling, until I do that, I shouldn't be taxed on it as an R3. Because I haven't put it into that higher revenue generating purpose yet, right? You know how you get.
Sure, I'm with you.
That's my view on zoning. I think zoning, if you let people build and you let the markets meet the need, the housing crisis will dissipate very quickly. Whether it's a wealthy developer making off with it or individuals having more equitable access to their own home ownership, I don't really care. I just want people to be able to afford to live where they work and not have to commute so much or be priced out of their own backyard.
Your take on Fluvanna and how this could impact the outer counties. Fluvanna is one that's near and dear to you.
Mm-hmm. Fluvanna, I think you're going to see and I know Jesse, bring him up again a second time. I know he's on here the other day. He's one of my buddies. I know he's mentioned Nelson and Buckingham. And Fluvanna's been this way. Lake Monticello has been a community that was built on the idea that it's a little outside of Charlottesville. It's close, but it's more affordable than some other aspects. Now, the issue is Fluvanna has a water issue. They need public water, which they don't have, and they need more commercial development as far as business generation. And so what you're describing is just the transfer of more housing, more rooftops, and Fluvanna already has a ton of rooftops. I would never put up a barrier to prevent people from moving in. I think if people want to move somewhere, they should be able to, but I think it'll continue to strain their budget and resources if their only tax base is property. They need commercial tax base, and they currently don't have the water infrastructure to accommodate for larger community development.
Bill says, ask Elliott this, doesn't upzoning create or drive inflation?
It does if you tax people based on the higher density use. Meaning, if I'm a single family home, R1, and I'm being taxed as such, but then it converts it to R2 or R3 or higher density, and I'm not converting it into a higher density unit, then yeah, you're effectively increasing my tax rate through an artificial zoning change that then drives up inflation by driving up the value of the home prices, and the potential. But once you extract that potential out and you actually do make it a higher density dwelling, you should be taxed on it at that time. And at that point, you should be lowering the aggregate cost of housing by increasing the supply. So, no, I don't think upzoning increases inflation. Upzoning should actually fix it if you don't tax people until it's a realized upzone.
Queen of Jack Jewett says this: I suspect part of Brackney's beef with the beer garden is that it will be soon become another part of a perceived whites-only welcome atmosphere in the downtown mall that she harbors, among others. Carol Thorpe leaving that comment on Facebook here. Your thoughts on that comment?
I can't speak to if that's what Brackney thinks, but if that is what Brackney thinks, I think that's both wrong, and I think it shows a certain disdain for for perfectly equal members of the community that deserve the respect and protection of the police. But I can't say that she meant that or not, so I can't speak to that.
Okay, that's a very, very, very fair response right there. Dude, you're good in this setting. I say this every time he comes on the show. He's so well versed in everything. NIL.
Yeah.
First, explain NIL to everybody.
Name, image, and likeness. So all of our
college athletes here.
Our younger neighbors here on grounds and around grounds at UVA and any college. College athletes can monetize the use of their name, image, and likeness, so they can do branding deals essentially and make money off the field or off the court with anybody really, as long as it's not paying someone to incentivize them to go to your school, right? So you can't just bribe people to play for UVA and then nothing comes of it, but for them going to play for UVA. There has to be both a offer of services, like a quid pro quo, meaning you have to be marketing of some sort or nature. You can't just hand them a check. And then it also can't be explicitly tied to their choosing UVA or choosing the institution.
But aren't some big alumni and donors?
So this is all an outcome of the U.S. Supreme Court finding in favor of athletes and finding that they can monetize the NIL. The NCAA adjusted very quickly and tried to loosen it up. Now it's very much based on the rules of any given state. In fact, Virginia, you're talking about the General Assembly, a bill is coming through to liberalize or loosen up the restrictions on our athletes to make it pretty fair for them to continue making money, or start making money, I should say. But some big institutions or big alumni or donors are trying to skirt around the system and say, I'll give you a bunch of money just to come here. Go give you $1 million to go play quarterback for Texas, which I'm using that as a hypothetical. That can't be done, and that has no legitimate marketing value. So I don't think we'll ever see a system where that's allowed to be done. But the NCAA is, in its current structure, is teetering, and I think we're about to see a massive reform, particularly among the bigger schools. And Virginia will be one of those bigger schools.
It certainly is creating potential parity. And a good one is HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, don't have necessarily the TV deals or the athletic budgets to compete on this macro scale with the Texases of the world, with the Michigans of the world, with the USCs of the world. But you notice with Deion Sanders' program, Jacksonville State, he's getting some of the blue chip recruits that otherwise would never consider Jacksonville State. And one of the reasons he's doing that is because of A, Deion Sanders has brand appeal. B, he was successful in his first year. C, he's getting eyeballs to come to Jacksonville State, but also through the leverage of NIL monetary gain. Is that how you're reading it?
Absolutely. Because he's aggressively treating it as a branding experience.
Yes.
And it should be a branding experience. I think Virginia is slow to this. They did just announce a collective a couple days ago. So, an independent group has come out. I think it's called the Cavalier Futures or something like that, Cavalier Futures Collective, where it's meant to kind of build a brand across all the programs and be a resource for helping monetize NIL rights for the players. But UVA, compared to its peers, is extremely behind on this effort, and you're seeing recruits change because of it. One of the number one offensive linemen, something UVA could need, just an hour south in Lynchburg, committed to UNC over UVA, and it was openly discussed in the NIL aspect about brand development in Chapel Hill. Now, having Air Jordan and Nike, that's been the case since Ronald Curry chose UNC over UVA.
Hampton High School graduate.
Right. So 20 years ago, we were having similar conversations, but this one's so overt. I think UVA needs to pull on its Darden ties, its strong alumni group, and its strong base, and get a little bit more creative and aggressive in how we elevate the brands of our players.
Dude, well said. Very, extremely well said. The guy is fantastic. We got to do this more often. You have so much to contribute, and I know you follow it closely. How about this open-ended, broad question? What is something we did not cover that is something the community should be following or watching that may not be getting the attention or the time on the radar in the news cycle it deserves? You want to talk the legalization of cannabis?
No, I got one for you. This
Okay.
is a one that should be on top of mind awareness, because it has a lot of impact, and that is federal courts are currently considering whether or not the House of Delegates, not the state Senate, but the House of Delegates may have to have a special snap election this year
Okay, this is a good one.
on the new maps. And that would mean Delegate Hudson runs on a new map in the next 8 months, or Delegate Bell may or may not choose to run. I mean, his district is materially altered, and things like that. And if a court were to order it, it would be very quick. And you'll see people should be aware of that and be thinking preemptively, because if you don't, what'll happen, the way that the internal party process works, is you'll wake up one day and you'll have a nominee that you've never heard of, or you didn't have any say in voting for, and you didn't really do a lot of shopping around, and next thing you know, that person might end up being your delegate, and you had no warning, right? You might wake up in 2 months and have a completely new delegate nominee, prospective nominee. I don't think that would apply specifically here with Delegate Hudson, but I'm saying surrounding counties, significant shifts. I mean, Greene County is no longer going to be in Delegate Bell's district. That's a significant portion. So if the courts rule on that, and it very well may be in the next few weeks, people will be called into elective action very quickly, and I think there could be a lot of shifts. I mean, it could really go to the majority. But no one's really talking about it because they feel
And that would be an off. Is this an off year?
Well, no, this is a 22 year, so...
Okay, so this is an off year.
You're right.
Because there's no presidential.
Right.
Off year is presidential, off year
Is what we just had with
is
the
what we just
governor,
had.
And then off is like 19 or 23, when there's no statewide, no federal,
But
no
local.
presidential, only state, senate, and local.
Right. So good God, the engagement numbers in a snap election in a off year would be dismal.
Well, I don't know. It could very well be shifted by the congressional races, right? A lot of people...
Or the influence of inflation.
Right, meaning you'd see national narratives find a higher influence on the outcome of the down ballot races. Typically, delegate races aren't. They're in odd years, and that's on purpose. So that local issues dominate the reason for voting. But instead, you're going to get things like Ukraine policy impacting your delegate races now. So, and I use that as an example, but I mean, it could be any federal policy will have a unique impact on determining a snap election outcome.
Well said. Jeff Cameron, former Virginia baseball pitcher, watching the program, he's got a question for you. Jeff Cameron, we love you, dude. How did the Cavalier Futures get around trademark rights with Virginia Sports Properties?
I think they spoke to, I know that they've been in significant talks with UVA's athletic department. Their board includes Matt Schaub, Ralph Sampson, a lot of business, not just athletes, but business developers. They've got people from IP backgrounds. It's either they got what they needed through licensing agreement, but the word Cavalier isn't trademarked. The word futures isn't trademarked. So, I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but...
Bill says Representative Good was nominated in a drive-by election in Rustburg.
Yeah. And
that's a topic for a different show.
He has a nomination battle right now with Charlottesville GOP chair.
The former chair.
Yeah. Dan Moy.
That's right.
And that'll be an interesting nomination battle. I believe that convention's in May down in Hamden, Sydney, in Farmville.
What do you make of conventions? Don't hold back.
In a perfect world, I think stronger candidates come out of larger races. I think it brings more people to the table. So primaries allow for a better testing of your brand. You're more likely to have a stronger outcome in a general if more people support your nominee coming out of a primary or out of a nomination battle like a primary that's very inclusive. I understand the merits of a convention. There are some strong reasons for them because it's meant for partisans. It's meant for who do we want to represent a particular set of ideological brands on behalf of a party. And therefore, it is their right to have a more exclusive process. I've been a part of both as a party member and as a unit leader. They have pros and cons. If push come to shove, I would probably suggest a primary. Yeah. But I don't necessarily thumb my nose at conventions. They can be done well.
We'll wrap up with this. Janice Boyce Trevelyan, loving the show. The tax the beer garden would collect helps everyone in the city, and the revenue would help the city in totality. She's enjoying the show.
And by the way, if the police don't want to do it, use some of the revenue to buy some private security. If someone like former Chief Brackney doesn't want to police it.
Yeah, it's like Scott Stadium.
Right.
The folks that are, is it RMC?
Yeah.
I think it's RMC. Camrath just shared the link. Jeff Camrath, the owner and founder of Aqua CVille Hand Car Wash, he just shared the link for CavalierFutures.com in the feed. Mr. Howard watching the program, Jason Howard, $5 a wristband for the beer garden idea is a steal compared to any beer festival I've ever attended. That's a deal. So, I mean, very much in favor of that. I'm going to invite you back.
Great.
I mean, you're fantastic. Any closing thoughts?
No, just I hope people are ready to enjoy what's going to be a beautiful spring as always and get out there and tip your waiters and waitresses. Always give a shout out to that community here because I'm excited to see that vibrant culture come back and be enjoyed, and it's something that we should pride ourselves on.
Well said. Elliott Harding, Esquire, guys, and just a great guy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Dude, you killed it. Seriously, you killed it. Judah Wickhauer, thank you very much. This is the I Love CVille Show. Tomorrow is Lee Elberson, and Lee is watching the program now. So we'll wrap with Lee Elberson, the CEO of Claiborne Education and one of the owners of Red Hats Hosting, or 8 Hats Hosting, on the program tomorrow. I'm Jerry for Elliott and Judah. This is the I Love CVille Show, where it's long-form content that cannot get taken out of context on the I Love CVille Network. You guys have a good one. Take care.